Good evening, everyone. I'm Laura Casa. I'm the co-director here at Saving Ocean Wildlife with my partner Dan Pingaro, who you'll meet later on in the program this evening. And we're so excited that you're here to join us tonight to hear about our exciting presentation. But first, I thought I'd start off by giving you a little background on our organization for those of you who may not be so familiar with us. We have a very lofty vision. We envision a healthy marine ecosystem where all wildlife thrive as a result of an informed society. And we do that through carrying out our mission of creating ocean partnerships to protect the wildlife, like we're doing here tonight, having our partners present on this interesting topic of the gray whale. And we also work with people like you who care about the animals and want to see these animals survive. But as well, we partner with government agencies such as NOAA at the federal level, the state of California, and many others to accomplish our work. We also partner with the scientific community. These are the folks that are out there studying the animals and telling us what's going on. You may now be wondering, well, how can I really get involved? What can I do to save ocean wildlife? And I'm here to tell you that you are the answer. You are the ones saving ocean wildlife if you're helping in any of these efforts. So first of all, you could help us report on animals that are in distress. Our goal is to have more eyes on the ocean. The Pacific Ocean is huge, but if more of us are out there keeping an eye out for entangled animals, injured animals, animals in distress, we'll have a much better chance of these animals getting them the help they need. There's a network of partners up and down the state that are there to actually go and rescue these animals. So we are really just the bridge between you who might see the animals and the folks that can provide the help. So please go to our website and get yourself familiar with the reporting tools that we have there. You can hit the report an animal button on our website. And you can also see the hotline numbers that you can call. We like to think of it as sort of like the Heimlich maneuver. You want to make sure you know what to do in case of an emergency, although you hope you never have to do it. So please make yourself familiar with that. Secondly, Saving Ocean Wildlife sees a big gap in saving entangled animals, particularly whales that are getting entangled off of our coast. When someone reports a whale entangled, it gets to the officials that will coordinate a response. However, it often takes 3 to 5 hours for that effort to be coordinated, for volunteers to get to the location, to gear up, and then get out to the scene where the whale was sighted. That's a long period of time where a whale can go off and never to be seen again. So what we're recruiting is a team of volunteers that will go out if they're nearby on their boat and stand by the whale, simply to be there so that the rescue boat knows where to go. So if you'd like more information on that, you can reach out to us through our website, savingoceanwildlife.org. And thirdly, you can always get involved by volunteering your time in other ways with us, or volunteering by making a contribution, making a financial donation to us as well. There are a number of ways you can help. We certainly could use help with our outreach, with social media, with our communications. So please get in touch with us. You'll find all the information on the website. So now let's get on with this exciting program we have tonight. Why are the gray whales dying? I want to thank Edward Jones, our sponsor for this evening, Jason Somrak, and the Mission Viejo office, as well as our individual donors who've made this free event possible. Also, Michael's going to introduce our partners, but we're grateful to be a part of the Ocean Foundation, and our partners are a project of the Ocean Foundation as well. So we're really excited to have their support in this. So Michael Atkins is our scientist on with Saving Ocean Wildlife, who's going to be the moderator tonight. I want to introduce him. It's coming from University of California at Santa Cruz. This is for his undergrad, and then got his PhD at MIT in Woods Hole. Michael has done just about everything related to the ocean. He's a sailor, he's a diver, he's done films with James Cameron. He pretty much knows it all, and he's really wonderful to be on board with us here to help us introduce this webinar series, because his goal is sustaining our future of our oceans for generations to come. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Michael, to start the program.
Well, great. Thanks a lot, Laura. And good evening to everybody, and welcome to the first presentation in our new webinar series. This series will focus on creating awareness around key environmental issues threatening ocean wildlife and the science behind these issues, as well as ways in which we can tackle some of these issues together through personal, collective, and even legislative actions. We had more than 175 people register for this webinar from around the country, Mexico, and even other countries, including folks from NOAA, EPA, universities, NGOs, and research institutions involved in ocean sciences. We want to thank each of you for taking time to help us launch this series, and especially for helping to save ocean wildlife. My name is Michael Atkins, and as Laura said, I'm a marine biologist and biological oceanographer here at Saving Ocean Wildlife. I will be hosting and moderating this series, as well as presenting the second webinar on the state of our oceans for Earth Day on April 22nd. So I hope you can join us for that one and subsequent webinars in this series. Your attendance and participation is what will help make this series a success. So we hope to see you there. Tonight's presenters are Jorge Urbán and Stephen Swartz, directors of the Laguna San Ignacio Ecosystem Science Program in Baja California Sur, Mexico. This is a nonprofit, academically based scientific program that investigates and monitors the gray whales and other species of marine life in Laguna San Ignacio at the Pacific Ocean midpoint of Baja California. Researchers there monitor the use of the lagoon by key species and species groups as indicators of the ecological health and status of this coastal lagoon and wetlands complex. They enlist graduate student researchers, their academic advisors and professors, and subject matter experts to develop science-based information relevant to living marine resource management, and to address concerns about future development, ecotourism, and the sustainability of the lagoon ecosystem for the benefit of their local community and the wildlife that depend on this unique marine protected area. Professor Urbán and Dr. Swartz are co-authors of a recent scientific paper published in January in Marine Ecology Progress series titled Poor Body Condition Associated with an Unusual Mortality Event in Gray Whales. They will be discussing this research in tonight's presentation. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me during the presentation using the chat tool under the More option or the ellipsis in the upper right-hand corner of Zoom. And I will select as many of them as I can for the Q&A session at the end. And please include your name and where you're from when you submit a question, and I'll give you a shout out when I ask your question. With that, I will turn it over to Professor Urbán and Dr. Swartz, and thanks again to all of you for joining us this evening.
To give you the scope of the UME, this is again from the NOAA Fisheries Service. There's a map that shows the distribution of the strandings in Mexico, all the way up through California, Oregon, and Washington, and the Canadian strandings, and then Southeast Alaska and Alaska as such. So this was an event that was range-wide. The whales were coming ashore, stranding all along their range. We have some numbers here, again, courtesy of NOAA Fisheries. For Alaska in 2019 was 48th and 45 last year. 2021 is in progress. The strandings seem to be taking place during the northward spring migration, leaving the breeding grounds and going up to the summer feeding grounds of the whales. So we don't have any data here to really fill these out. Long story short, in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California was 122 stranded whales and 79 in 2020. By country, if we look at Canada, US, and Mexico, we had 214 in 2019, 174 in 2020, and the numbers keep changing. These are from last week, reported by NOAA. In 2021, this number will probably increase if the event continues, but we'll have to be watching that throughout the season. Let's put this in perspective. The NOAA Fisheries has plotted the 18-year average. Those are stranding average for the gray whales along North America. These are the black bars. And you can see that in 2019, the orange bars, and in 2020, there was a significant spike or increase in the number of stranded whales that were being discovered along the beaches of North America. Again, this is probably a minimal number because these are the only ones that made it to the beach. The tides and the winds blew them ashore. We suspect well, we have no way of really estimating how many whales actually died, because some of those carcasses, we have to realize, were probably lost at sea and sank and never made it to the beach. Again, in perspective, NOAA wants to compare the turn of the century UME, the 1999-2000, which are the blue bars, to the current UME, which are the, to the current UME, which are the orange and the green bars. And you can see that the turn of the century UME was a bit more extreme than the current 2019 and 2020. Well, these numbers are confusing. Anyway, you can see the degree of difference and extreme of the turn of the century UME and the one that we're looking at now. I know most of you are probably familiar, most of our viewers are familiar with the gray whales distribution in natural history, but we'll do a quick review here. In the eastern North Pacific, there's the larger of the two populations that are recognized, of around a little more than 21,000 individuals at this point in time. And they range from south of Baja California along the Mexican Pacific coast, all the way up along North America to their feeding grounds up off of Alaska, through the Bering Straits into the Chukchi and the Beaufort Sea. On the western side of the North Pacific, there's a second recognized population that's extremely low in its abundance. It's estimated from photo ID data to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 individuals. And then there's a mixing zone where both of these populations mix along the Kamchatka Peninsula and the eastern Siberian coast. So this is an area where the two populations mix. And that's a topic for a whole nother discussion about how that interaction is between the two populations. So in the spring, gray whales leave their breeding range, their winter range down here in Baja California, and they migrate along the North American coast, go through the Aleutian Islands and fan out across the area where they primarily feed all summer long. This is their bottom feeders, and that's their primary food is found on the shallow continental shelf waters along the upper northern Pacific basin, and then, as I said, through the Bering Straits and beyond. This reverses in the fall. When the days start to get shorter and the weather gets nasty and winter is coming, ice starts to form up, they come out of the feeding range, they come back down along the coast of North America, heading to their winter breeding range. Now, it's during this southward migration that most of the mating takes place. The part of the function of the migration is to bring males and females of reproductive age together, because during the summer they're spread out over a vast part of the North Pacific. And so this brings them all together, and they all end up down here off Baja California, where the females that are bred the previous year will be giving birth to their calves during the migration. And when they get to Baja, and then those that are in estrus and ready to mate will hopefully conceive and have a calf the following year. So that's a quick summary of the review. In Mexico, there are three major destinations or aggregation areas that we call them for the gray whales. In the north is Laguna Ojo de Liebre, which is also known as Scammons Lagoon, and it's right here. And in the middle is Laguna San Ignacio. And then to the south, there's a southern complex of estuaries and mangrove areas called the Bahia Magdalena complex. And our activities are focused on Laguna San Ignacio and the Bahia Magdalena area. We do collaborate with the scientists with the Biosphere Reserve that monitor the gray whales in Ojo de Liebre, the larger lagoon to the north. So beginning in 2018, and then again, unfortunately, in 1920, and again this year, we noticed in our surveys of the lagoon very, very low calf counts, lower than they should be. And that was a hint that something was up. We also watched an increasing number of skinny whales or emaciated or malnourished whales began to increase during that same period of time. We conduct boat surveys in the lagoon. We started the northern in San Ignacio Lagoon, now I'll be talking. We follow a GPS course down the middle of the lagoon, which is the deep water occupied by the whales, and we make a count of the whales that are there a couple times a week. So here's the kinds of things we were seeing. The heavy dark red line is this year, 2021, and the other lines are from previous years, starting with the green one, 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 20. And you can see these are the single whales. These are the breeding animals. They do not have a calf in tow. So the first thing we notice is that the last 3 years, there seems to have been at least a 2-week delay in the arrival times. If we look at this 50 animal count here, it took about 2 more weeks to reach that count in 2019, 20, and 21. So that was unusual. The departure times, the high counts, however, were all about similar. They're within the range between 100 and 200 single whales in the lagoon during the winter season, and its peak in this would be about the end of February, beginning of March. And the departure dates, except for 2016, so this is a reminder for me to go back and see what was going on in 2016. They left early, but the other years they all seem to leave right on schedule. What caught our attention, unfortunately, was the cow-calf or mother-calf pair counts. Let's start with a typical count before 2018. It was not unusual at the peak of the season, end of February here, beginning of March, 5 to more than 100 mother-calf pairs inside of Laguna San Ignacio, coming and going. In 2018, the floor fell out of that. They dropped down to hovered around 20 pairs all season long until the very end of the season. And there's a phenomenon where females with calves from more southern areas seem to be moving into San Ignacio as they migrate north. Then in 2019, 2020, and again this year, the numbers have been very, very low in Laguna San Ignacio, often almost always below 20 pairs. So this is suggestive of some sort of decline in the reproductive capacity of the whales. We're not sure. We'll talk some more about probable causes, but this was again something that was unusual for what we expected in the norm. Now, one of our most powerful tools is photographic identification. It allows us to identify individual whales, to look at their duration of stay in the lagoons, fidelity, who's coming back each year, calving intervals for breeding females, movements among the aggregation areas, and of course, minimum age can be estimated as well. Well, one of our student researchers, Randy, decided to look at this skinny whale phenomenon, and so she started looking at those photo ID data for a series of years, 2008 to 2011, to see what the number of, what the percentage of skinny whales was. And then a second student, Flor, and Sergio Martinez, our field chief, the two people in the center of this photograph here, picked that up when we started noticing the low calf counts and skinny whales. Started looking at the more recent photo ID data from 2018 to 2021. And here's what they did. They adopted a procedure that was developed for the Western gray whale by David Weller and Amanda Bradford, where they would look at 3 specific features. They look at the area behind the base of the skull, behind the blowholes, which is an area called the postcranial area. They would look at the dorsal flank of the animals along the side to see what the condition was there. And also above the flipper axis here is the scapular region to see what the scapula was. And they would take these 3 areas and they would give them a numeric score depending on whether they were in good condition, fair condition, or poor condition, or unknown if it couldn't be determined from the photographs. So if the head was in good conditions, we can see here the blowholes on this example are nice and full, and there's a nice smooth curve coming off of the base of the skull back to the back. If they are in fair condition, we know they lose some weight during the winter because they are not feeding at all in the Baja. There's not much for them to feed on. And then very poor condition, they would give a score of 1, and so on. So doing a matrix of this, you could score a number of photographs from the photo ID collection and look at the results. So quickly again, here's a normal back behind the skull head area. Here's a right flank. We've got a nice convex curve to it on this healthy whale. As they start to lose weight, and again, we expect them to lose some, particularly lactating females during the winter months, you start to see that scapula protruding along the flank here, right above the flipper axis. And you start to see a decline in the tissue behind the skull, behind the blowholes, and you start to get a flattening of the curvature of the flank around the dorsal ridge and along the body side there. Here's an example of the extreme poor case. Now, let me point what we got here. This whale is swimming away from us. Here are the blowholes right here. The eye of the whale is right there. And you can see this big bulge here is actually the base of the skull, and all of the tissue that would normally be here and make this a smooth transition back to the lower trunk of the body is gone. All of that fatty tissue is gone. This round ridge here is actually the spinal column. The whale is rolling on its left side, so this is its right side that's exposed. And this bulge that you see here is actually the body cavity, and the internal organs are bulging out. And all of the tissue that normally would make this a convex curvature to the back is now gone, and it's very, very depressed or concave. So this is an extreme example of a skinny whale, and this is what was getting our attention. Here's another quick one. Here's the eye of the whale right here. It's swimming from left to right. Here, the top of the head, the blowholes, the base of the skull again, all of the tissue that's normally here in a healthy whale seems to be missing. And you can see the scapula raising up here. This is the edge, the dorsal profile of the scapula. So these are things that caused us concern. Here's some a couple flank shots. This is the tail end of the whale here, going to the right, it's the anterior. You can see that instead of a convex flank side, it's now concave. It's actually caved in, and the spinal column is extremely seen here. And here's just the opposite side. This is the head on the left side and the tail on the right. And you can again see the curvature to the body flank and the spinal column, very, very pronounced. Borrowed this picture from ACS Los Angeles. Elisa Schulman-Yanger posted that on their Facebook page. This whale's swimming away from us. Here's the dorsal ridge that's found on gray whales. You can see the extreme spinal column, concavity of the flanks on the side, and again, the bulging abdomen. So something was going on here, and we wanted to look into it. So as I said, Randy looked at the photo ID data from 2008, 9, 10, and 11, and found that the poor condition, the red bars, were running around 6.5% during those 4 years. They fluctuated. But what she did also notice was the blue bars, the fair condition animals, increased in magnitude through 2010. She then graduated, and a new student, Flor, came on. And Flor looked at 2018, 19, and 20, and it became apparent in 2018 that we started to see more of the skinny whales. By 2019, the fair condition had increased significantly, as did the poor condition. And remember, 2019 is when NOAA declared the UME because of all of the spike in the strandings along the North American coast. And in 2020, we'd gone from 8.2%, 23% in 2019, and 30% in our photo ID collection of animals that were in very, very poor condition. Similarly, in Bahia Magdalena to the south, Lorena, our field chief there, reported an increase in the poor condition whales over the 3-year period that she had the data to look at down there. So this gave us a rather subjective evaluation of something that just looked not right as far as the health of the animals and their body condition. But again, it was a subjective scoring. It gave us some index to kind of sort these animals. But we wanted something more precise, so we brought in some drones. And this happened because of two of our good friends and colleagues, Frederick Christensen and Lars Bader, developed a technique in Australia to look at southern right whales and calf growth during the reproductive season of the southern right whale, and the shrinkage of the moms, of course, as they're converting their body stores energy into milk for the calf, and as the calf grows. We partnered with them to bring that technology to Laguna San Ignacio, originally just to do the same thing, look at calf growth and female shrinkage during the winter season. Little did we know it would coincide with the skinny whale phenomenon and the UME. We trained some pilots. Fabian Rodriguez is from La Paz, and Fabian Vevetier is from France. When you said, "Hey, Fabian," you'd get two people answering. So we had to designate between the two of them. So we named one Fabio Uno from Mexico and Fabio Deux from France. And that way we could keep our signals straight. This is the type of imagery that they're getting with the drones using high definition video. On the top here, we have a healthy whale. It has the classic sort of torpedo shape, very hydrodynamic in its efficiency for swimming. But then a skinny whale is an example in the bottom. You can see again the bulging of the abdomen, the concavity of the flanks, the pronounced spinal column, and you can also, if you look, the flippers are right here, just anterior of the body cavity, and you can see that, at least in this picture, the dorsal edge of the scapula sticking up, and you can't see much behind the skull, but believe me, this animal is definitely missing all that body fat. These are not the same whale, but there's examples just to show you of kind of the progression of what we were witnessing. We have in 2017, again, that nice torpedo shape, a healthy fat whale. In 2018, we started seeing the skinny ones, the declining in the robustness. And then by 2019, we had extremely emaciated whales in the numbers that we saw in the previous bar graphs. So what we used is, again, with our partners, Christensen and Bader, we would take an image and divide it into 5% sections, both dorsally and laterally, and then just using some basic geometry, calculate the mass or the volume, which equates to mass of the whale along each of these sections, and then sum those for the mass of the whale. And then because we took so many pictures during a season, we would repeatedly photograph some of the same individuals, so we could look at changes in their body mass over time during the winter season. And we reported this, as Michael mentioned at the beginning, just recently in a paper. The lead author, again, was Frederick Christensen, and it had all of us on it that worked on this project to try and see if we could come up with a health index or a body condition index. So here's some of the data to give you an example of what we were ending up with. These are plots of body volume, as we calculated it from the previous slide, over body length. And so these animals here between 4 and 6.5 meters are the calves that are born each year. Some of them are usually born around 4.5 to 5 meters, but they grow very quickly while they're in the lagoons. This section in here represents the juvenile or immature, sexually immature animals, of which there are not that many in the interior of the lagoons. And then all of these guys up here above 11 meters are all adults. The red line is the average index, the product of the length times the volume. And so if we put a log transformation on this so it's a little easier to see, you can see that most of the calves were looking pretty good. There's always a few small ones around, don't have many juveniles. But then if we look at the adults here, we saw preponderance of more than we wanted to see, of adults that were less than the average body condition or below that red line. And so we plotted some of this, and here's kind of the results for the 3 years that we analyzed in that paper, 2017, 2018, and 2019. Let's first look at the calves. We can see that if this is the zero line or the average line for condition, the calves in all 3 years were above average condition. Then we look at their moms over on the far right here. They were also above average condition, or in good condition, as we would say, for all 3 years. But if you look at the matures, we saw a declining trend in the matures, significant the last 2 years of 18 and 19, and also mature animals. So immatures and matures showed a definite decline in their body condition during this period of time, leading to the 2019 UME and all of the strandings that took place. So that makes us wonder what will become of the gray whales if this trend continues, and it seems to be continuing in 2021, the present winter. Let's take a quick look at, again, the NOAA Fisheries Service has been monitoring and monitoring the southward migration every fall past California, Central California, and estimating the population size. And we can see that the population seems to be bouncing around a bit since 1968 up until 2020. And so what I did was I drew a box around some of these apparent declines in the population, but then recoveries. Decline in the population and then a recovery. 1988-ish, it seemed to be a peak time for them, but then by 1992 they had declined, 1993 declined again, but then recovered over a period of 4 or 5 years. to a little over 20,000 animals. Here's that turn of the century mortality event, 99 to 2000, resulted in an estimate showing the population had declined. But then in recent years, it seems to have recovered and come back up to a peak again in 2016-17 of around 25 to 27,000 whales. And then most recently in 2020, after the 2019 UME began. We're not sure if there'll be a recovery. We hope there'll be a recovery, but only time will tell. So we can see the population has a tendency to bounce around a little bit. So what would be causing such a thing? We know that ship strikes are a problem for gray whales, but it's believed at this point in time that although ship strikes do occur because the whales have to migrate through major commercial shipping lanes each year, both southward and northward as they make their way to and from the breeding grounds to their feeding grounds. Entanglement was mentioned earlier. Laura in her introduction was talking about that. It is a serious issue, particularly with all the active fishing gear and derelict fishing gear that's along the coast. But if you start to look at the numbers, we know that gray whale calves in the lagoons particularly become wrapped in fishing lines that they usually obtain outside the lagoon and then come in with it. And there's a disentanglement program down there that's very effective. Just make a note here, check with Save Our Ocean Wildlife website to learn how you can become more involved and contact authorities if you encounter and you can report wildlife that's having a problem with that. And there's always, because of the emaciated look at some of these skinny whales and the trends we've been seeing, that many of these stranded whales exhibit clear evidence of emaciation, low tissue lipid or oil content, which are all suggesting a lack of food. And we know from our colleagues that study the oceanography in the North Pacific and the Arctic that climate change and related environmental changes have been affecting the annual seasonal cycle of primary production in the higher latitudes. And that's the basis for the marine food chain for many, many species of marine life. And that includes the whales. So that is another factor that could be contributing to this. So we can say, at least at this point in time, in the case of the gray whales, possible contributors to the UMEs that we've been experiencing in the turn of the century and the current one, one possibility is that because of the a limitation in the available food, that they may have exceeded, the population may have exceeded what we call carrying capacity, or the optimal number of individuals of a species that can be supported by the environment unless the resources change. Climate change also could be limiting the primary production and the production of the gray whale's primary food sources, which are benthic organisms, and this also could further stress the whales. It's also possible that in some years, we know the seasonal ice is undergoing fluxes in the North Pacific and Arctic, and that may prevent the whales from utilizing some of their primary feeding areas. The prey may be there, but they may not be able to get there, or not be able to get there long enough if the winter is too extreme and the ice is preventing them from getting into those places. So anyway, if food is limited, we'd say that the whale's condition would be expected to be declining, and they may be unable to reproduce normally, and they may become susceptible to disease and malnutrition, which would exacerbate the deterioration of their condition, and all of that could be contributing to the UME. Again, we don't know exactly what all the factors are that are contributing to it, but these are some of the key features. However, I'd like you to consider this. The gray whales have been around for a long time. The modern gray whale that we know has been around for at least 120,000 years. Their ancestors, or the fossil gray whales, Escherichtids, ancient Escherichtids, date back as far as over 2 million years ago. So as a species, the modern gray whale has been around for some time. So it's had to weather through advances, cooling periods, glacial advances, sea level rise and fall, which means that their major feeding areas that we currently recognize may not have been available to them, because in the case of the Arctic, the Bering land bridge during the drop in sea level would have prevented them getting into many of the areas that they feed in now. So they've weathered the storm, and we like to say that we believe that they're robustest for a reason. They're a coastal species with a generalist and reasonably flexible feeding strategy. They specialize in bottom feeding, and morphologically they're specialized, and behaviorally for that. but they can also respond to other opportunities to feed on alternate prey. As in addition to bottom feeding, they can, to a degree, gulp like a rorqual whale and skim feed like a right whale. So they can prey switch to a certain degree. If push comes to shove and their food of choice, the benthic amphipods and other benthic invertebrates they feed upon are not available, they seem to be able to make it by switching to other species. So we hope that the prognosis is good for them, that because of their history of the population as we know it, tends to oscillate with environmental conditions that may be affecting their availability of prey. And we obviously wait to see what happens after 2021 and this current UME hopefully runs its course and we start to see some more normal reproductive numbers and numbers of whales. All of this work couldn't be done without sponsors. We're a nonprofit under the Ocean Foundation, and we have a huge community of supporters, and we're extremely grateful to all of them for making this work possible. And we have our hats off to all of our university researchers and students and their advisors and professors that actually do the heavy lifting and all of the field work that we do down in Baja California Sur. And with that, I'm going to take a breath and see if we can have some questions. I'll turn it back over to you, Michael.
Thank you. We've received a few questions during the presentation, and I've selected a few for Professor Urbán and Dr. Swartz. If you have a question you want to ask, you can still send it to me using the chat tool under the More option in the upper right-hand corner. And if you would, just include your name and where you're from, so I can give you a little shout out. Now, interestingly, one of the first questions that I had was from Joel Reynolds at NRDC, and he said that there was a live whale stranding on Dockweiler Beach in Los Angeles this evening, very close to where I am. And it's still breathing, it's moving its tail, but it's stuck until high tide at 11 p.m. tonight. He says it's very sad to watch, and he's wondering if there's anything that can be done. And so I responded to that question, and Dan and Laura, you're welcome to jump in because this is a big part of what Saving Ocean Wildlife is involved in. And so the answer that I sent Joel was that yes, for injured and stranded marine mammals in California and along the west coast of the United States, you call the West Coast Marine Mammal Stranding Network at 866-767-6114. And that's actually, they're affiliated with the NOAA Fisheries, and they handle it from there. Laura and Dan, did you have any comments that you want to add to that?
Just appreciate Joel speaking up about that. We had not heard about that, and hopefully someone's reported that to NOAA. I think we might send a text message to our contact at NOAA just to make sure. And really what's helpful when folks do spot these animals is if you can take some photos, even some video, and just kind of any details that you have for when you do speak to an official, because then they can really assess sort of what gear do they need to bring to do a rescue, you know, kind of what's going on with the animal at the time. So again, thank you, Joel. As you can see, we didn't plant Joel in the audience with that. Sad to say, this is happening right here, right where we are. So definitely a pressing issue. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Laura. And let's see, we've got a question from Michael Stalker with Ocean Conservation Research. He actually asked two questions. The first one was that he recalled that the 1999-2000 UME seemed to bring the estimated populations down by thousands. If you don't, if this isn't covered in the presentation, have you correlated lagoon population numbers with strandings? This is for Stephen and Jorge.
The turn of the century UME, I think the population, we can go back and look at that graph, but I think the population went from somewhere in the mid 20,000 following the UME down to 16 or 17,000 animals. So it was a significant decline, loss of the animals. It caught everyone by surprise because nobody was, you know, out counting stranded whales or even expecting them. So when the 2019 UME started, NOAA organized the UME working group, and they developed a network up and down the entire range of the gray whale to respond to as many strandings as possible, take all the usual measurements, get tissue samples if the whales were fresh enough to try and look at lipid content, evidence of disease and so on, and other evidence of possible mortalities of those whales. So 2020, they were going to repeat that process, but COVID interfered with everything, closed the beaches, closed the labs, closed a lot of the facilities where the responders were busy working. And so we're not sure just what samples other than actual bodies counted on the beach we may get this year. We're keeping our fingers crossed they're able to get as much as possible.
And Michael had another question, and it is, any thoughts about the extreme die-off in our kelp forests' role in the current UME?
That's an interesting question. I'm familiar with the die-off. Macrocystis likes cold water, cold, clean water. That's why it does best along the California coast on the outer islands, the Channel Islands and Catalina, where you've got a nice flow of cool, nutrient-rich water coming up out of the depths. Along the shore, there's just a lot of pollution and a lot of activity, and the water gets warmer, and the kelp, the Macrocystis, doesn't do well in that, and then the sea urchins can get the upper hand and graze it down. This phenomenon takes place all along the coast, even down to Baja California. I remember visiting San Benito Island a few decades ago, and it was rich in kelp. And then going back just a few years ago, they've had the same problem there with the warming of the water. And the kelp is gone, which means all the shellfish are gone, the lobsters are gone, and the local fishing cooperatives are feeling the impact of that because they're not able to harvest like they used to.
Sue Coulter is an employee with the Noyo Center for Marine Science, and she wants to know if their food is not as nutritious or as healthy as it used to be.
I wish we had Sue Moore on the line. She's the expert up in the northern part of the range with regards to feeding and food availability. I don't have any information on that. I would suspect with all of the questions that are being juggled around between everyone that's interested in this topic, that someone's probably looking at the nutritional value of the prey species of the gray whale, but I have nothing that I can contribute at this point on that topic.
I'm sorry to say, but Diana Alps just updated us on the whale at Dockweiler Beach, and she said it just passed. It's no longer breathing.
Oh, that's too bad.
Thanks for that, Diane. Karen Baker, I'm not sure where she's from, but she asks, could you explain how climate change might be correlated with their food resources?
Well, it's a rather complex system, but in a nutshell, basically every spring, the seasonal ice in the Arctic melts, along with some of the permanent ice in the Arctic that melts, and that creates a great freshwater input into the northern oceans, the higher latitudes. The North Pacific gyre with the surface winds causes upwelling of deep nutrient-rich water that's been below the photic zone as it's made its way around the Pacific Basin. And the fresh water and the deep nutrient-rich water, as the days get longer and longer, are exposed to more and more sunlight, and they basically support a huge, massive plankton bloom, a seasonal plankton bloom. Smaller such plankton blooms occur all along the North American coast in many different locations. Google North American coastal plankton blooms and you'll see some beautiful false color imagery, like Monterey Bay and then down off of Ensenada and so on, other places where these plankton blooms occur. So that's a seasonal cycle that happens. And the oceanographers are telling us that the Arctic is undergoing some major changes in its oceanography. There's some excellent articles online now that you can read from the Interarctic Research Institute, kind of consolidating as best they can all of the different factors that seem to be changing the nature of the Arctic Ocean and how it's affecting the food chains.
I see that there was another update from Diana Alps that NOAA did respond, and it was a very emaciated 20-foot gray whale. I mean, just ironic.
Topic of the evening.
Yeah. This one is from Barbie Halaska at the Marine Mammal Center. Do you know where have they seen the prey switches to skim feeding and gulping? Mainly in Arctic waters? Are they feeding on krill?
In between the two UMEs that we spoke about this evening, there was a period of time, 2006, 2007, 2008, where we started seeing some skinny whales, and it was the first time it ever got our attention. And at that point, a lot of the gray whales were experiencing the loss of their historical feeding grounds in the Chirikov Basin, in the Chukchi Sea, and they were finding other places to feed along shore on ghost shrimp and other invertebrates, feeding off of Kodiak Island. There's some nice publications documenting them feeding on mysid shrimp, which are a small shrimp-like creature that swarm over the surface of the bottom of the ocean rather than burrowing into it like the amphipods do. It's also been reported in the literature that gray whales will skim feed on small bait fish and even krill if it's around. So they have that ability to do that gulping and that skimming in addition to their basic and specialized bottom suction feeding.
We have a question from B. Meltzian, and he or she asks, have there been any detailed necropsies and histopathological analyses of selected tissues?
I'm going to pass that one to Jorge because he's the Mexican representative. He represents Mexico on the UME working group, and they've had all the discussions about the necropsies to date. So Jorge, would you like to add a comment here?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Well, there were not too many opportunities to have fresh whales on the beach to have necropsies with the good collection of organs. And there were some in 1990, and the different samples are in process to analysis. In last year, there were very few because the pandemic problem. But until we know, there is no signal of some infection, general infection of the whales or viruses as cause of the mortality of the whales. Different reasons. Some of the whales died because ship strikes or stranded or entanglement with some different kinds of fishing nets, but nothing special that indicate the reason of the mortality base of the analysis on the samples. The veterinarians are still in the process of the analysis of the samples.
Great, thanks. This one is from Mario Roederer, an immunologist at NIH, and he says that it sounds like a virus, the gender disparity, that some whales are highly impacted and others are not. Cachexia is a common byproduct of viral infections like HIV in humans prior to therapy. Is there any effort to collect plasma for deep sequencing from these animals?
Plasma from the whales? I mean, you mean collecting blood for analysis?
Yeah, to look for byproducts of viral infections.
Yes.
Just to see if it is viral.
Yeah, no, well, I'm not sure exactly the different kind of samples that they have opportunity. There are protocols, but depending how is the state of the animal, the kind of samples you can collect. But based on the results that we have until now, there is not virus reasons for, in general, for the mortality of the whales.
Asks, we have about 20 to 25,000 gray whales now, give or take, depending on these UMEs. But what was the historic number pre-whaling?
That's a subject of long and drawn-out discussions. Unfortunately, in the heyday of the whalings, the 1870s, I guess, 1860s, 1870s, up until the turn of the century, no one was doing a census of the overall population, so we don't know. What the scientists of the Scientific Committee of the International Whaling Commission have done previously has tried to extrapolate from the landings, the catch records, landings of oil, barrels of oil in the major ports that where the whale oil was destined to be sold, and then looking at estimating struck and lost ratios, and it gets very complicated. They've come up with estimates that are wide-ranging as to what the pre-exploitation population of gray whales possibly could have been. There's no firm number. And then there was another approach looking at genetics. Stephen Plumby and Liz Alter, his student at the time, tried to look at mutation rates in gray whales and extrapolate. There's a technique for going back in time, looking at using mutation rates. They came up with yet another estimate of what it may have been. And then the caveat on all of that is if the gray whale's prey is changing, prey availability is changing either because of fluctuations in the primary production that drives that food chain, and or the rise and fall of sea level, submerging and then exposing the shallow continental seas of which the whales evolved to feed on. What I'm trying to get at here is there is no firm agreement on what the pre-exploitation size of the gray whale was.
And then our last question is from Bill McNamara in Puerto Escondido. And he says, how can visitors to San Ignacio make contact with researchers? And are speakers, presenters available to interested boating organizations such as ours? Bill McNamara, Commodore Southern California Yachting Association.
Well, if you look at the slide that's on the screen, there's a website at the top. It's www.sanignaciograywhales.org. There's a contact us tab on that website, as well as a lot of information about everything that our program does is published there, as well as the history of the program and little bios of all our key researchers and so on. So the best thing to do is to send us an email at that from that website using the contact tab, and we'll be glad to respond and talk about what we may be able to offer.
Well, great. Well, we've reached the end of our time tonight. Let's give Professor Urbán and Dr. Swartz a very warm thank you for their informative presentation. We can do it virtually. I think you can select the the clapping icon. And thank you both. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks again to all of you for your participation in our first webinar. I hope to see you all again on April 22nd at 7 p.m. Pacific time for my presentation on the state of the oceans, past, present, and future. And you can register for it on the Saving Ocean Wildlife events page. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Pingaro, the other co-director of Saving Ocean Wildlife, for our concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for hosting tonight's event. We greatly appreciate it on this premiere evening. And Stephen and Jorge, thank you very much for a fabulous overview of what is happening with the gray whale at UME. I'd also like to thank the Ocean Foundation that has been a phenomenal supporter and sponsor of Saving Ocean Wildlife. And of course, this webinar wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the support of Jason Somrak and Edward Jones in the Mission Viejo office. We really appreciate all their support for us. And behind the scenes, well, maybe you see them in the small squares, Ralph Butler, Karen Schneider, and a handful of other folks that have really helped put this on this evening. Thank you so much for all of your support in putting this together. We're thrilled. And the attendance was more than we could imagine, from LA to the East Coast and all the way out to Becky in London. Thank you for attending tonight's presentation. More than anything, as we heard tonight about the gray whale, the animals need your support. So I'd really like to ask you to take your time and consider how you might be able to help support Saving Ocean Wildlife, possibly through a donation that you can make directly at savingoceanwildlife.org. It might be through volunteering, your technical expertise. It could also be picking up our top 10 things you can do for ocean conservation and wildlife, and something you could easily do right at home, right now, starting this evening. So there are many ways to get engaged. And as you heard earlier from Laura, $1,000 contribution allows you and 9 guests to have a four-course lesson on oceanography from Dr. Michael Atkins. What an amazing opportunity to have a customized, almost one-to-one experience. And finally, the next webinar is the condition of our oceans on April 22nd and Earth Day. And that'll be from our very own Dr. Michael Atkins. And until then, we wish you a beautiful evening and thank you for attending, and we'll see you on April 22nd. All right. And with that, we wish you a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.